On this highway, in this car, is a woman in distress. She has just committed a heinous crime and is fleeing for her life. Only a few moments ago, she did the unthinkable. Her husband, who has been, let's just say, less than kind to her, had gone too far tonight, and she had finally snapped. But it's the way that she snapped that changed the way women defend themselves against cruel husbands in pop culture forever. She rolls down the window and tossed a very important piece of her husband into a cornfield before speeding off, wondering if he's even still alive. As she speeds into the dark of the night, her husband, who's back at home, laying in a pool of his own blood, she wonders, was she wrong? As many know, DV, unfortunately, isn't something that society takes seriously very often. Most times it's swept under the rug or taken lightheartedly, victims are blamed, perpetrators are given slaps on the wrist or let off scot-free, and the cycle continues. But what Lorena Bobbitt did back in 1993 made people take it even less seriously, and the jokes about her case began to fly.
She cut his dick off, drove down the highway, and threw it out the window.
She obviously got 20/20 vision. She found a little thing. It was very difficult to find.
I want 11, I want you to proceed down on the freeway. See if you can't locate a dick.
She empowered women. She empowered women. In the 90s, she had chicks cutting off dicks and throwing them out of car windows. Remember that? Lorena Bobbitt was her name. Look it up. Woman driving her car. I want singing into the dick. You should know.
The fact that this little woman dismembered her allegedly abusive husband was seen as a punchline. But what actually happened was anything but funny. I guess what makes this story ironic or even funny is that Lorena was born on Halloween 1969 in Bucay, Ecuador. Born Lorena Gallo, she came from humble beginnings to a conservative Catholic family. She grew up in Venezuela, where her family relocated when she was a child, before eventually moving to the United States. From a young age, Lorena had big dreams. Like many young women from modest backgrounds, she sought opportunity and a better life, dreaming of the idyllic American life she saw on television, a life of love, stability, and success. She desired the American dream. In 1987, Lorena, then 18 years old, moved to the U.S. on a student visa. She worked as a manicurist and nanny to support herself. It was during this time that she met John Wayne Bobbitt, a young U.S. Marine, at the Marine Corps Ball, a dance hall for enlisted men in Virginia. He was tall, good-looking, and exuded confidence. For Lorena, he represented the American dream, an all-American man who would provide her with the perfect family and home. But when John saw her, it seems he saw her through the eyes of a predator. When John saw Lorena standing in the dance hall, he admired how timid, shy, and vulnerable she appeared. His exact words were that she looked shy and innocent. He decided to go talk to her, which would prove difficult because she couldn't speak English very well, and she didn't understand much of what he was saying, and vice versa. He thought it was amusing watching her struggle to communicate with him. Also, his admiration for her perceived innocence and naivete turned him on because it showed him that she'd be easy to control. During an interview he did with ABC News in 2019, he said that her language barrier would allow him to take charge in the relationship, more than he could with any woman who could speak English. She'd have to solely rely on him. He was basically looking for someone easy to rule. Seems Lorena was his perfect victim, love. Either way, he won Lorena over that night with his charming ways, and after only 10 months of dating, John proposed and the couple married on June 18, 1989, when Lorena was 20. Lorena finally got her American Prince Charming, or so she thought, because according to John, he states it was basically a marriage of convenience. Lorena's visa was getting ready to expire, and he proposed to her to keep her from being deported. John says that at the time he thought that he loved her, but soon we'll see. What seemed like the start of a fairy tale marriage quickly devolved into a nightmare. A union marked by a combination of DV, marital sexual violence, and financial struggles was on the horizon. Though John and Lorena initially appeared to be a picture-perfect couple to outsiders, tensions and violence soon erupted in their marriage. Lorena later testified that John became controlling and abusive only 1 month after they were married. One day, while the couple was driving on a highway, John began to speed and purposely swerve the car. Obviously frightened, Lorena begged him to stop driving like this. She grabbed the wheel to stop him, and as she did this, John punched her in the face. She was shocked that someone would hit her like this, especially her husband, someone she thought was there to love and protect her. But this was only the beginning. She claimed that John would hit her, demean her, and R-word her on multiple occasions, describing a pattern of cruelty that left her feeling trapped and terrified. While John denied these allegations, Lorena's version of their life together painted a portrait of a man who was domineering, explosive, and emotionally unstable. If what she says is true, it seems his own background had a lot to do with his volatile ways. John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 23, 1967, in Niagara Falls, New York, to an average working-class family. He was raised alongside 3 brothers in Buffalo, New York, in a household that has been described as turbulent. His mother was a drug user, and therefore he was taken away from her and went to live with his aunt and her family. John's upbringing was marked by a tough, unstable environment, and, as he entered adolescence, he became known for his outgoing, rebellious nature. You'd think all that hostility would be great to work off after joining the U.S. Marines, but it seems that only made it worse. He didn't even take it seriously at first. He only joined because his friend asked him to. But unfortunately, it seems his military ties would help him get away with his cruelty later on in his abusive dealings with Lorena. Even after the attack, Lorena stayed with John, but in her eyes, their financial struggles exacerbated the abuse. After leaving the Marines, John had difficulty holding down jobs, and the couple faced mounting debt. Lorena, working 2 jobs, often shouldered the responsibility for paying their bills. As their financial difficulties deepened, so did the strain on their marriage. Friends and family began to notice the change in Lorena. She became quieter, more withdrawn, and showed signs of emotional distress. But John blames Lorena's friend, Jana Basutti, for the change in Lorena. From day one, he saw Lorena as someone looking for a meal ticket, someone to take care of her, and him being in the military, he was supposed to be her prize. When she was working as a manicurist at Jana's salon, Lorena noticed how successful Jana was and wanted that for herself. Jana was a very successful entrepreneur who had boats, a luxurious home, and fancy cars. She, too, was the American dream that Lorena always desired. John feels, when Lorena saw how Jana was living, that made her want to replicate that, and that put unnecessary pressure on him and their own lifestyle. He says at first they were okay living in their small studio apartment, but after seeing Jana's beautiful home, the apartment was no longer good enough for Lorena. He says it was things like that that put a strain on their marriage and caused their troubles, but Lorena begged to differ. Lorena claimed that John not only physically abused her, but also forced intercourse on her repeatedly throughout their marriage. Some of John's friends even recalled how he used to brag about R-wording Lorena all the time. This is something that happened very often, but wasn't taken seriously, because people, primarily men, didn't see how you could actually R-word your own wife. Marital sexual assault was not taken seriously at all, or even considered a thing, so he allegedly continued to do so. Not only that, Lorena feels John took another dream away from her, her dream of motherhood. Lorena suddenly became pregnant and he wanted her to have an abortion. She didn't want to do so and pleaded that she wanted to keep their baby. John told her that she wouldn't make a good mother and that if she did have the baby, then she'd have to raise it herself because he'd leave her. Not wanting to lose her husband or marriage, she conceded and made an appointment for an abortion. Also, according to Lorena, she said that while they were at the clinic, he taunted her about how much it was going to hurt and how the procedure was going to kill her. He just kept getting crueler. She alleged that she tried to leave multiple times, but like many victims of DV, she found herself pulled back into the relationship by fear, financial dependency, and John's promises to change. these elements would form the backdrop for what would become one of the most notorious crimes in modern history. On the night of June 23, 1993, after nearly 4 years of an increasingly volatile and abusive marriage, the tension between John and Lorena finally reached a breaking point. According to Lorena's testimony, John had come home drunk and R-worded her yet again that night. Afterward, Lorena was left emotionally shattered, her body bruised and her mind reeling. She described herself as being in a fog, overcome by years of accumulated trauma and terror. In the early hours of the morning, she walked into the kitchen to get a drink of water. Trying to calm herself down, she looked over to the refrigerator and saw the kitchen knife. Still reeling from what just happened to her, she grabbed the 8-inch carving knife, returned to the bedroom where John was sleeping, and committed the act that would make headlines around the world and make men collectively grab their own genitals and cringe. In a moment of rage and desperation, Lorena severed John's member. Afterwards, she fled their apartment, still holding the knife and the severed organ. She drove aimlessly through the streets of Manassas, Virginia, in a panic. She claimed she didn't even realize that she was still holding it. She only noticed when she couldn't figure out why her hands felt greasy and kept slipping on the steering wheel. When she looked down, she saw blood and part of John in her hand. She freaked out and quickly threw the organ out of her car window into a field. Eventually, she called 911 and admitted what she had done. Meanwhile, John woke up in excruciating pain, unaware of the severity of the situation until he saw the blood and realized what had occurred. Lorena was arrested later that day while John was rushed to the hospital. She told them where they could find John's missing piece, and remarkably, a search team found John's severed penis, and after an intricate 9-hour surgery, doctors successfully reattached it. The operation was a medical marvel and added another sensational layer to a story already laden with shock value. Overnight, the story of Lorena and John Bobbitt became a media spectacle. The gruesome nature of the crime, coupled with the lurid details of their volatile marriage, was tailor-made for tabloid headlines. It seemed that no matter where you turned, Lorena's name was everywhere. Talk shows, newspapers, and TV stations all covered the case with a mix of fascination and lucidity. At the heart of the media frenzy was a question that divided the public. Was Lorena a victim or a villain? To some, Lorena was a woman pushed to the edge, a battered wife who had finally snapped under the weight of years of physical and sexual abuse. To others, she was a cold and calculating woman who had committed an unforgivable act of mutilation. Men, of course, hated her. Many even feared that she'd given their wives and girlfriends the same evil idea. Controversial radio show host Howard Stern even made disgusting comments in regards to Lorena. He said he didn't believe John raped Lorena because she's not that great looking. He also callously added that Lorena obviously liked the abuse because she stayed. He said, "She didn't want to leave him, so, Let me tell you something. She must have really liked it if she didn't want him to leave so bad." John, too, became a central figure in the media storm. Now becoming a household name, the subject of tabloid stories, late-night talk show jokes, and global fascination, people were both horrified and fascinated by the brutality of the act, and everyone wanted to know who the man behind the story was. Despite the allegations of abuse, he positioned himself as a victim, giving interviews in which he denied ever hurting Lorena and framing her as unstable and vindictive. He often stated that she did this to him because she was jealous and insecure about his cheating, and she'd go off the rails when other women gave him sexy gazes, and she'd threaten to cut his little John off then. He claims that he was her meal ticket and she didn't want anyone to threaten that. And obviously the public wanted to know about the then current function of his whiner. People wanted to know if it still worked and how. It was a crazy talking point in the coverage. And he went on to capitalize on his newly found 15 minutes of fame by doing a series of bizarre and even funny things. In 1994, he starred in 2 adult films called John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut and Frankenpenis, playing up the sensationalism surrounding his infamous injury and subsequent surgery. These films became cult hits, further fueling John's notoriety. Both John and Lorena faced separate trials, each attracting intense media attention. John was tried first in November 1993 for marital sexual assault, a charge Lorena's legal team had pressed in connection with the events leading up to the incident. However, because the laws on marital forced intercourse were weak at the time, the charge of marital sexual assault required proof of excessive force beyond the act of R-word itself. John was acquitted, a verdict that outraged advocates for domestic violence victims. 2 months later, Lorena went to trial for malicious wounding. Her defense team argued that she had acted out of a combination of years of abuse and temporary insanity. The defense presented evidence of John's alleged pattern of violence and highlighted Lorena's emotional and psychological fragility after enduring years of abuse. Lorena herself took the stand, recounting in vivid detail the horrors of her marriage and the events leading up to the fateful night. The prosecution, meanwhile, portrayed Lorena as vindictive, claiming that her actions were premeditated. They argued that the mutilation was an act of revenge, not one of self-defense. They doubled down on their claims, specifically after she made this damning quote. When Lorena was arrested on June 23, 1993, she told the police, "He always have orgasm, and he doesn't wait for me ever to have orgasm. He's selfish." This conversation with the detective was tape recorded, and this transcript was read later in the trial, which made Lorena look very bad, made it look like she only mutilated her husband because he wasn't good in bed. But later on, in a different interview, Lorena explains what she actually meant at the time. She says, I might have said things I didn't mean to say. Again, I was still learning English, and I tried to connect the words together. And it was just a mess. I was trying to explain myself that there is no good when a man and woman have non-consensual sex. There was no translator at all, and that's a very important point. Now that I look back at these things, I'm like, oh my God, a translator would have been nice. After a sensational trial that riveted the nation, the jury found Lorena not guilty by reason of temporary insanity in January 1994. She was ordered to undergo a 45-day psychiatric evaluation, but was ultimately released and did not serve any jail time for the crime. In the years following the trials, John and Lorena Bobbitt went down very different paths. After John tried to capitalize on his notoriety by appearing in those adult films, did reality TV, headed a band, he also supposedly joined a band called the Severed Parts. This wasn't proven, though. He soon faded into obscurity. However, his life after the trial was marked by a series of run-ins with the law, including arrests for domestic violence involving other women, further damaging his reputation. Also, most of which he didn't admit to and accused them of trying to clout chase off of him. Then, in a very ironic turn of events, John ended up being amputated again, losing more of his body parts. And this time they couldn't be reattached or saved. John lost all of his toes due to having toxic peripheral polyneuropathy, a condition that involves damage to the peripheral nervous system, which sends signals between the central nervous system and other body parts. He says he contracted this ailment from drinking severely contaminated water during his time in the military. This has caused him to not be able to work anymore. Lorena, on the other hand, sought to rebuild her life out of the public eye. She divorced John, changed her last name back to Gallo, had a daughter of her own, and even found love again. She eventually found peace, becoming an advocate for survivors of domestic violence. She founded Lorena's Red Wagon, an organization dedicated to raising awareness about domestic abuse and helping survivors. The case of John and Lorena Bobbitt became a cultural touchstone, sparking conversations about marital sexual abuse, DV, and the dynamics of abuse in relationships. Lorena's story resonated with many women who had endured similar struggles but felt silenced by a system that often failed to protect them. In later interviews, Lorena has reflected on her journey, expressing regret over the violence of that night, but also emphasizing how it led her to advocate for victims of abuse. She continues to speak out about the importance of understanding the complexities of domestic violence, and her case remains a cautionary tale about what can happen when a victim feels trapped with no way out. Lorena Bobbitt's crime may have been infamous, but her story serves as a powerful reminder that behind every headline there is a deeper human tragedy. The pain, fear, and desperation she experienced are shared by countless others, many of whom still struggle in silence. So, lurkers, what do you think? Ultimately, was Lorena wrong for what she did to John? Do you think he's telling the truth that he never abused her? Do you think they're both lying? Let me know down below.